focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil, contextualized conversation with perspective.
60 Minutes.
60 Minutes.
60 Minutes.
60 Minutes.
New season begins Sunday on CBS.
She is a beloved American icon and head of a media empire. But is Oprah Winfrey happy? How do you define happiness?
Yeah, I call it happierness.
Find out when we go person to person.
They all relate to false statements on a federal form in which Hunter Biden purchased weapons, and he said, I am not using drugs, when in fact he was using drugs.
There's no reason why these appropriations bills have been stood up by a few folks. It's holding up the progress of the House, and it undermines our party and our conference.
Corrupt Marsha Blackburn is owned by the NRA and big pharma and insurance companies. We need someone who answers to the people.
Hello, I'm Weijia Jiang in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. A federal grand jury has indicted Hunter Biden on gun charges. It's the first time the U.S. government has filed felony criminal charges against a child of a sitting president. President Biden's son is accused of falsely claiming he was not using illegal drugs when he bought a gun back in 2018 in October. The indictment comes after a plea agreement fell apart in July. If convicted, he could face up to 25 years in prison. CBS News senior investigative correspondent Catherine Herridge joins us now. Catherine, this is not a very lengthy indictment. What are prosecutors saying that Hunter Biden did?
Well, it all goes to the possession of the weapon and allegations that he lied about the status of his drug use when he obtained the weapons. The first two counts are felony counts, and they relate to making a false statement about the drug use on a federal gun form. And the second is continuing those false statements when he purchased the weapon from a gun dealer. And then the last one is simply possessing the weapon while he was on narcotics.
And as we mentioned, this was part of a plea agreement that you watched fall apart in real time, but that also included other potential charges with tax charges.
That's
so
right.
Should we expect more down the pike?
I think the short answer is yes. The door is wide open to additional charges in this case on the alleged tax violations. Just to look back to late July, there was a broad agreement that would have been for misdemeanor tax charges and then for a felony gun offense. And that would have been wiped clean if Hunter Biden abided by the terms of the deal. That fell apart over the simple question that the two sides were not in agreement over whether that broad deal shielded him from potential criminal charges in the future. So they've been litigating different elements of the agreement since, especially the gun agreement. But the government's position is that it is not valid, and they have now charged him today.
So what happens next? Obviously, he'll be arraigned. Do we know when? Do we know when we might see more charges?
So in order to bring any tax charges in this case, Special Counsel Weiss will have to go to a grand jury in another jurisdiction where he has the venue to bring those charges. So in other words, where the alleged crime took place. That is not Delaware. Based on the court filings, that's either Washington, D.C. or out in California. To answer your question about the felony gun offense, it will proceed like the hundreds of other felony gun offenses do in the federal system. There would be an arraignment, then there would be different motions by the sides. We can expect Hunter Biden's legal team to argue the charges are not valid because of the prior agreement on the gun offense, but also that there are constitutional questions here. There's litigation in the courts over whether barring drug users from possessing a weapon does violate their constitutional rights.
And those are still playing out. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But could they use that as their argument, even though there has not been a ruling on that?
Well, they could certainly use it. We spoke with a former senior Justice Department official who said it would be extremely ironic if the sort of poster case for this question of the constitutionality of barring a drug user from possessing a weapon became President Biden's son.
So it could be even more historic than
I think so.
It already is. Thank you so much,
You're
Catherine.
welcome.
For more on the political fallout from all of this, CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us now. Nicole, it's great to be with you. I'm sure that there's a lot of reactions from Republicans about this. What are they saying?
Well, really, reaction, as you can imagine, Weija, is falling on party lines, in terms of Republicans, and many of them seem to feel like this is potentially just a slap on the wrist. As Oversight Chair James Comer put it, he believes that these are easy charges, and he feels that they don't go far enough. Take a listen.
That's the one crime that he committed that you cannot tie Joe Biden into. So we'll see what happens with the other 11 or so crimes that the president's son's committed.
But I can assure you that I spent 10 years as a federal prosecutor, and I can assure you that Chairman Comer and Chairman Jordan do not know what goes into charging criminal charges and what is required. And so if they are going to say there should be more charges against Hunter Biden, they don't know what they're talking about.
Of course, that was Dan Goldman, a Democrat who was the impeachment counsel in 2019. And, his position on this, because I asked him whether or not he thinks that, for instance, these charges will fuel House Republicans, given the impeachment inquiry that was announced this week. And as you heard from him there, he said, these Republicans, they're not prosecutors. So really, if they think they're going to see more charges, they don't really know what they're doing here. We also heard from Jamie Raskin, who is a ranking member on the Oversight Committee, who, criticized Republicans, saying, they can't applaud for the system when it comes to Hunter Biden and then try to tear it down when it comes to former President Trump. So, again, we certainly expect this to continue to play out as Republicans in particular ramp up their investigations into Hunter Biden, the Biden family, and some of the president's associates. Although, as you know, Weija, the White House continues to insist there's no evidence of wrongdoing.
Yes, they are repeating that every chance they get. You brought up former President Trump, Nicole. There was some news today out of Fulton, Georgia, where he faces criminal charges. What can you tell us about when he might go to trial?
Yeah, well, it doesn't seem like it's going to be anytime soon. As you know, this is a very big case involving 19 defendants, including the former president. Two of those defendants, Sidney Powell, who was a legal counsel for the former president, and Kenneth Chesborough, who authored memos with respect to a fake elector scheme. Those two individuals have requested a speedy trial. And so last week, a judge granted their request to hold that trial next month. But what the judge did rule today is that the other defendants, including the former president, will not be tried next month. He does not think that there is enough time to try to pull together a trial with so many individuals. So the district attorney asked for her reaction today at a press conference later this afternoon. She did say that she was okay with that, provided the other defendants in this case didn't also request a speedy trial. Certainly the district attorney is concerned that, if all of these defendants try to break off their cases, that it could really strain the judicial system in Fulton County. So the hope is maybe these two individuals will be tried together in October and then the others at a later date.
Nicole, it's so stunning that that is going to be part of the backdrop of the 2024 election. And so is this impeachment inquiry into President Biden, which I know you asked House leaders about today. What are they saying today?
Oh, well, obviously, House Democrats are pretty frustrated by all that is going on with respect to this impeachment inquiry. I did have a chance to talk to Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who held a news conference a bit earlier today, and he continues to dismiss this inquiry as a stunt.
There is no evidence, not a shred of evidence, that President Biden engaged in wrongdoing. There is not a shred of evidence that President Biden committed an impeachable offense. There was not a shred of evidence that President Biden broke the law. This illegitimate impeachment inquiry is a partisan political stunt, period, full stop.
Now, I did ask him what Democrats' strategy will be now that this impeachment inquiry has been launched, whether that's messaging, whether that's trying to block records requests or subpoenas. And what the leader told me is that, they plan to counter Republicans with the truth and the facts, that they believe that this impeachment inquiry was ordered by the former president himself. And, the leader went on to say that, Congress writ large, but particularly House Republicans really need to be focused on more pressing matters, including preventing the government from shutting down at the end of this month.
Which is another big question mark. Thank you so much, Nicole. Great to see you.
You too.
Thousands of auto workers could go on strike if agreements with 3 major automakers are not reached. Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis have until just before midnight tonight to resolve contract disputes with the United Auto Workers Union. Workers are demanding a 36% boost in pay, among other things. The White House has urged both sides to come to a fair agreement. Senator Mitt Romney is calling the Trump base the populist and demagogue portion of the party. His former senior advisor joins our political panel next. You're streaming America Decides.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
it's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that, too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battery lamps.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News. An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Now one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
People are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether.
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels. 100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels. Streaming on the free CBS News app.
There's no question but that the Republican Party today is in the shadow of Donald Trump. He is the leader of the greatest portion of the Republican Party. It's a populist, I believe, demagogue portion of the party. Look, I represent a small wing of the party, if you will. I call it the wise wing of the Republican Party.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was Utah Republican Senator Mitt Romney yesterday describing the Trump base of the Republican Party. Romney also made it official that he will not seek a second term in the Senate. McKay Coppins, in an excerpt in The Atlantic of his forthcoming book about the senator, wrote, quote, Romney's isolation in Washington didn't surprise me. In less than a decade, he'd gone from Republican standard-bearer and presidential nominee to party pariah thanks to a series of public clashes with Trump. Christian Ramos and Kevin Madden join us now. Christian is a Democratic strategist and senior advisor at Way to Win. And Kevin is a senior partner at the Penta Group and served as a senior advisor and spokesman to Mitt Romney's 2012 and 2008 presidential campaigns. Thank you both so much for being with us today.
Glad to be here. Thanks.
Kevin, I want to read you a little more from Coppins' book excerpt and get your reaction. He says, quote, a very large portion of my party, Romney told me one day, really doesn't believe in the Constitution. And he'd realized this only recently. So I wonder if you think that had a part to play in his decision to leave.
Yeah, I think it had a tremendous impact on him. And I think it probably grew harder and harder for him to rationalize and deal with internally over time as he saw more and more of it as he was in the Senate. There just is this canyon between what people say publicly about Donald Trump and and also I think with the importance of confronting Donald Trump, I think inside the party, and then what they say publicly and what they do publicly and how they lead fights or communicate the type of important details that maybe some of their constituents or party members or party leaders need to know. So I think that canyon increasingly remains tough to right now to bridge. And that's why I think in all the public remarks that he's made since his announcement, he's sort of spoken to that. And I think the thing that I always remembered about Romney and what made it really easy to work for him is, you go through these 18-hour days, really tough campaigns. But when you're working for somebody who's an optimist and has a really good sense of the chart forward, it becomes a very incentivizing thing. And I think it's become harder and harder as he's worked through the Senate and he's dealt with some of the folks internally in the party for him to be optimistic about it. I still think he's an optimist. I still think he has a hopeful view of where the party can go and where the country can go. But that ultimately, if we're going to manifest some of that, it has to return to a sort of new generation of leaders. And that was, I think, the crux of what he was saying yesterday.
Sorry, go ahead. You were going to chime in?
No, I was just, first, we're not going to see the likes of Mitt Romney in the Republican Party, I think, ever again or for a long time. And the reason I laughed or smirked is because the next generation of the Republican Party is MAGA. It's MAGA. And I think MAGA is everything that Mitt Romney hates about the current Republican movement. And so it's tough, right? He has to be looking at the writing on the wall with Mitch McConnell and his health and what's going on in the Senate and what happens when Mitch McConnell goes. Mitch McConnell was another outspoken critic of the president. When I talked to folks on the Hill and they talked to me about the dynamic there with McConnell leaving, Mitch McConnell was the guy who held the line against the MAGA extremism. And so people like Mitt Romney, of course, they're like, what am I going to do now?
And Democrats are pointing to MAGA as what's fueling the impeachment inquiry on Capitol Hill, at least in part.
Sure.
So
yes.
I wonder, now that it is an inquiry, does that make it more difficult to defend against or to dismiss, as many Democrats were doing?
This is what I'll say. Kevin McCarthy is trying to hold on to his speaker's gavel. Doing impeachment plus the budget negotiations, he is just trying to keep the right flank of his caucus, which is large, in check. And he is doing anything that he can to give them little pieces of this and that to keep them from voting him out as speaker. And that's really all this is.
Do you agree with that, Kevin?
Well, I think that's an important part of it. I think the danger in that is when you have something as weighty of a constitutional process like impeachment and you get pressured into it, it becomes very impossible to manage. And if you think about trying to manage an impeachment inquiry at the same time where, what are we, 17 days away from a potential budget showdown where all of your attention should be applied there, the problems start to pile up. And I think the the strategies you're going to need to really manage this conference, which is a very volatile conference, and there are some appetites in there about impeaching Trump that are sort of rabid. It becomes really increasingly problematic, and it increasingly becomes problematic when you start to look at the electoral politics of this, because if you look at the folks that make or break national elections, who's going to control the House, who's going to control the Senate, who's going to win the presidency, those suburban swing voters, they do not like chaos. They do not like this type of instability. So while a lot of folks will communicate that to McCarthy, we have to do this if we're going to win the majority back, there's probably a greater likelihood that it could potentially cost them.
Well, of course, at the center of the inquiry is Hunter Biden, and I have to ask you about today's big development because he was indicted on that gun charge. Christiane, is this going to make it harder for President Biden? Because he sort of, we know that talking about his family is his Achilles heel. He wants to talk about his family. He wants to defend his family. This is hard.
Of course it's hard. And you know what? Joe Biden is a great father, and he loves his son. And of course, you're right. He's a human being, and this is tough. I'll say two things here. One, we got a record of job creation. We got a small business creation. We've done a lot of incredible things in the economy. And as long as we're talking about that, we're good. And the rest of this stuff, it's got to play out in the court system, and people are going to have to figure that out. But at this point, look, the president is focused on the job at hand, on an economic recovery that is working for everybody.
And we have to go, but Kevin, quickly, is that going to be enough to overcome the impeachment inquiry and Hunter Biden charges?
No, because the court of law, where this might be fought out of the court of an impeachment process and the court of public opinion, they tend to intersect here. In the court of public opinion, one of the things I worry about if I was a Democrat is at every step of the way, the Hunter Biden inquiries have gotten more and more embarrassing for the White House, and more headlines come out that are negative. So that would be a problem that I'd have to worry about if I were a Democrat.
We will be watching. Thank you both so much for your time.
Great to be with you.
Thank you.
Tennessee 3-member Gloria Johnson is looking to unseat Republican Marsha Blackburn in the U.S. Senate. We will speak to her about her campaign coming up. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgments of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
They have called me a liberal, extremist, a socialist. Boy, are they blowing it up today. I'm not sure what they're afraid of, but I have an idea.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was Tennessee State Representative Gloria Johnson announcing her bid for U.S. Senate. She was a member of the Tennessee Three. That was a trio of Democratic lawmakers who Republicans tried to expel from the state legislature over their gun control protest on the House floor. Tennessee State Representative Gloria Johnson joins us now. Representative Johnson, it's great to see you.
Well, it's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Tennessee has not elected a Democrat to the U.S. Senate since 1990. And I wonder why you think that could change this time around.
Well, the reason I believe that can change is because the Republican Party is not your granddad's Republican Party anymore. They're very extreme. We see people all across this state that want something different. They're not happy with the extremism in the Republican Party. And currently in Tennessee, we have more Democrats and independents than we do Republicans. And what we are seeing from people, they are completely unhappy with being ignored. You know, when it comes to gun violence, 80% of Tennessee families wanted to see some gun sense legislation. And our supermajority just was not having it. And the reality is Marsha Blackburn is the same. And corrupt Marsha Blackburn is owned by the NRA and big pharma and insurance companies. We need someone who answers to the people. And, you know, I live in Red, East Tennessee. Districts were drawn to beat me, and they've spent hundreds and thousands of dollars doing it. And I have always been able to build a coalition to win folks and independents and Republicans as well. And I've always outperformed the top of the ticket. And I think with the way folks are feeling today, we are absolutely going to be able to replicate that statewide.
You just brought up gun laws and gun reform. Of course, that is why you may look familiar to many of our viewers, because you were, of course, one of the Tennessee Three that stormed the House floor in your state. And I wonder how much of that is going to be part of your campaign. I know you've also spoken about abortion at length as well and women's rights. So how would you describe what you're running on?
Well, clearly it is an agenda that the majority of Tennesseans agree with. They always try to paint me as some sort of radical, but the reality is all of the legislation that I have brought in the State House and what I will focus on in D.C. or as a U.S. Senator, I'm going to be focusing on those issues that really affects people in their home and just lifting up and making sure that Tennessee families thrive by making sure they have access to affordable health care. And for women, that means reproductive choice for them and their autonomy over their own bodies. And then 80% of Tennesseans, Republican, Independent, and Democratic, want to see gun sense legislation. I will continue to fight for that. In making sure that our public schools, that every child in every zip code has a great school to go to. Because there's so much going on now with privatizing our public schools, and we've got to make sure that we keep our public schools strong and that we're allowed to teach our factual history. Because democracy, the bedrock of democracy is public education. And we've got to make sure that we're improving it, but we also need to make sure that we're fully funding it and not draining tax dollars away for unproven ventures, quite frankly.
Senator Marsha Blackburn, your opponent that you just brought up, she, when it comes to abortion, says that you support it until, quote, after birth, which is something you have denied. So I wonder, what is your stance on abortion, and what do you want the Tennessee law to be?
Well, what she's talking about is murder. I want women to have bodily autonomy. I want decisions to be made in the doctor's office between women, their family, and their physician, the way that we have been doing it. And women need access to abortion, and abortion is health care. And late-term abortion is something they always try to bring up, but it's propaganda. When no one decorates their nursery and then decides to have an abortion. When there are those late-term abortions, that's about traumatic situations and dangerous situations for a fetus or a mother. And they have got to make these tough decisions that no one wants to have to make, but medical diagnoses demand that something is done and lives have to be saved. And so those decisions sometimes have to be made. But what we can do to make sure that women are healthy going into pregnancy is make sure they have access to affordable care their whole lives, so they don't find themselves pregnant with no physician and just starting to get care after they become pregnant. We need to make sure we're taking care of people, but we also need to make sure that women have full autonomy over their own bodies, or women are not equal if they do not.
And I want to ask you, too, why you want to come to Washington. I mean, you're doing the work in Tennessee. You just laid out all the reasons why people who live there need you. So why do you want to come and do that in the U.S. Senate instead?
Well, for those very same reasons. We need someone who represents all Tennessee families in the state state Senate, or the U.S. Senate, because we do not have that right now. Neither one of our U.S. senators are representing the needs, wants, and values of Tennessee families. They're absolutely not doing it. Marsha Blackburn hasn't held a town hall in her 5 years in the Senate, and I believe 2 more years in addition to that. So it's been 7 years since she's been heard from. And she's tweeting on Labor Day about people are trying to take your grill, which is not factual. None of the things she said about me are factual. She's tweeting about what's happening in Portland, Oregon, while she's completely ignoring the people that she represents in Portland, Tennessee.
All right, Representative Johnson, thank you so much for your time today. Hope to have you back sometime.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
That does it for today. Thanks for watching. They're streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals. How did you deal with being discriminated against?
I just worked harder.
The future